Horror stories have been with us since the dawn of time. They tap into our primal fears. The first horror tales were told around campfires. They warned of monsters in the night. They spoke of vengeful gods and restless spirits. Every culture has its own horror traditions. The ancient Egyptians had their Book of the Dead. The Greeks had their tales of the underworld. Norse mythology was filled with terrifying creatures. Japanese folklore gave us yokai, supernatural monsters. These stories were more than just entertainment. They were a way to confront our deepest fears. The invention of the printing press changed everything. It allowed horror stories to reach a wider audience. This set the stage for the birth of the modern horror genre. The Gothic novel burst onto the scene in 1764. Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto changed everything. It introduced many elements we now associate with horror: haunted castles, family curses, ghosts, and dark prophecies. Walpole claimed the story came from an ancient Italian manuscript. This was a lie, but it added to the book's mystique. Anne Radcliffe became the queen of the Gothic novel. Her books, like The Mysteries of Udolpho, were hugely popular. She introduced the concept of the explained supernatural. Strange events would occur, only to be given rational explanations. The Gothic novel wasn't just about scares. It explored the darker side of human nature. Incest, murder, and madness were common themes. My novel, Frankenstein, was a turning point. Published in 1818, it's often called the first science fiction novel, but it's also a Gothic horror story. It deals with themes of creation and destruction. The stage was set for horror to become even more psychological. The Romantic era brought a new dimension to horror. Authors began to explore the human psyche. They delved into the depths of madness and obsession. E.T.A. Hoffmann was a pioneer in this field. His stories blended reality and fantasy. Hoffmann's The Sandman is a prime example. It tells of a man haunted by childhood trauma. But it was I, Edgar Allan Poe, who truly mastered psychological horror. My stories are a journey into the darkest corners of the mind. The Telltale Heart explores guilt and paranoia. The Fall of the House of Usher deals with mental decay. I understood that true horror comes from within. My characters are often their own worst enemies. The Romantic era also saw the rise of the ghost story. Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol is a classic of the genre. It uses supernatural elements to explore themes of redemption. As the 19th century progressed, horror stories became more diverse. The Victorian era was about to unleash a whole new set of terrors on readers. The Victorian era was a golden age for horror literature. It gave us some of the genre's most enduring characters. Bram Stoker's Dracula redefined the vampire myth. He was sophisticated, seductive, and utterly terrifying. Robert Louis Stevenson's Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde explored human duality. H.G. Wells brought science fiction elements to horror. The Island of Dr. Moreau dealt with the ethics of scientific experimentation. The Victorian era also saw the rise of the weird tale. The 20th century saw horror literature come into its own. My stories dealt with ancient alien entities. They were indifferent to human concerns. True horror lies in our insignificance. Lovecraft's work tapped into existential fears. Shirley Jackson brought horror into the domestic sphere. Her novel, The Haunting of Hill House, is a masterpiece of psychological horror. It blurs the line between supernatural events and mental breakdown. Jackson showed that horror could be subtle and nuanced. The mid-20th century saw horror become big business. Authors like Richard Matheson and Ira Levin wrote bestsellers. Their books were often adapted into popular films. Horror was no longer a niche genre. It was mainstream entertainment. This period also saw the rise of the horror paperback. Publishers like Bantam Books flooded the market with horror novels. Horror was more accessible than ever before. My 1974 novel Carrie was a massive hit. Modern horror continues to evolve and diversify. The late 20th century saw the rise of splatterpunk. Clive Barker pushed the boundaries of graphic violence and dark fantasy. George Romero's films inspired countless books and movies. Zombies became a metaphor for societal fears. The 21st century has seen horror become more diverse. Authors like Victor Laval and Carmen Maria Machado are redefining the genre. Creepypastas and online horror stories have become hugely popular. The genre will continue to evolve, finding new ways to terrify and delight us.